position that this government had strongly opposed. A month after that decision was handed down, we believe that actually a number of detainees were returned to their home countries or sent to other countries. One of these detainees was a Palestinian named Marwan Jabour, who was actually handed from the US to Jordan. The Jordanians interrogated him for a month and handed him to the Israelis, to Shin Bet. Shin Bet held him for about a month and a half, actually let him see a lawyer. And we like to criticize Israeli techniques, but this was the first time he had seen a lawyer in more than 2 years, and then released him. And so I was able to interview him shortly after his release, and he told me a very detailed and compelling account of spending more than 2 years in CIA custody. And what he said was that he was originally arrested in Lahore, Pakistan in May 2004 by Pakistani forces. He was detained in Lahore briefly, moved to the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad, where he was held for more than a month in a secret detention facility that, interestingly enough, was run jointly by the ISI, the Pakistani intelligence services, and the CIA. And of course, he wasn't privy to the actual agreement between those two groups, but he said that from what he could see about how the place operated, the CIA were in charge. They were making the decisions about who was released, who was held, who was transferred. In this facility, this is where he was kept awake for a week. In this facility, he was badly abused. He was forced to stand for, a full day, kept awake, put in painful positions so he couldn't sleep. Subject to techniques that were extremely abusive, if not constituting torture. Then after a month there, he was flown, again, packaged up like Khalid al-Masri, sort of like a mummy, and flown to Afghanistan, where he was held in a secret prison where he believes that all of the personnel were American, except perhaps the translator. He said there were native speakers, one Lebanese, one Iraqi, who may or may not have been naturalized American citizens. But everyone else, and he estimates that there were some 70 personnel in that prison, including doctors, psychiatrists, guards, interrogators, prison directors. It was a full-fledged facility. All the rest were Americans. In that facility, he was stripped of his clothing and held naked for a month, and filmed naked and interrogated naked by women interrogators, which probably would be painful for anyone to be kind of, brought into a room with 10 or 15 people, one holding a camera, and filmed naked and interrogated naked, but I think is even more shocking for someone from a more traditional Muslim background. When he was not being interrogated, he was chained tightly to the wall of his cell with a very short chain so he could not stand up. He was for punishment sometimes. When they caught him talking with other detainees once, they chained him up in painful stress positions, these kinds of positions where your arms are twisted behind your back and you're chained to a ring in the floor. He was threatened that if he didn't cooperate, he'd be put in what the interrogators called a dog box, which is something that they had in the interrogation room, and it was like a small box, that would kind of crush you in a painful shape and, give rise to all kinds of claustrophobia and have very little air, which we heard other prisoners being subject to. This went on for more than a month. Over time, as the months went by, his treatment improved. He was given his clothing back, piece by piece, though, over a 6-month period, sort of earning back his clothing. The physical mistreatment ended. He was placed in a larger cell, finally, after 6 months, and he started getting better food. In other ways, though, his treatment changed not at all. He spent nearly all of his time alone in a windowless cell. He wore leg irons for 1.5 years. He spent 1.5 years without ever seeing sunlight. He talked about how he just wanted to see something green or something blue, the sky, a plant. Worst of all, he spent more than 2 years with no human contact with anyone, except for at the very beginning there was a chat with some other prisoners, but he was punished for that and then put in another area. But essentially, 2 years with no human contact with anyone besides his interrogators. And he worried incessantly about his family, but was not allowed to get in touch with them in any way, even to send a letter to his wife and 3 daughters, he had 3 young daughters, to let them know that he was alive. So the first time that they had any idea what had happened to him was when he suddenly showed up in Israeli custody last year, after more than 2 years of separation. As I've emphasized, during the first 5 years of this interrogation, detention, and rendition program, its hallmark was absolute secrecy. Even when the Washington Post published its very important and very comprehensive front-page story on the program in November 2005, there was not a single administration official who was willing to speak about the program on the record. It was, we will not confirm or deny. This changed dramatically in September 2006. And you may have seen the nationally televised speech that President Bush made on September 6th, when he announced that 14 former CIA detainees had just been transferred to custody at Guantanamo. So they had gone from CIA to military custody. At that moment, not only did he acknowledge the existence of the CIA detention program, he defended the program in the strongest terms, arguing that it had saved American lives. In particular, and without, of course, describing these procedures, he claimed that the alternative set of interrogation procedures, those are his words, that had been used against the CIA detainees had led to the disclosure of vital intelligence information. President Bush's speech, and I remember hearing that it was going to be given, we found out, I think, about 2 hours in advance, and actually sitting there watching it, was appalling on several levels. First, and maybe most importantly in terms of American traditional standards, it amounted to a full-throated defense of torture. Although he refused to describe the CIA's interrogation techniques, he knows what those techniques are, and he defended them wholeheartedly without saying what they were, but using the euphemism of alternative interrogation techniques. He defended them wholeheartedly. Second, although he said that the CIA's prisons were temporarily empty, he left open the possibility that they would be used again, and in fact, he nearly promised they would be used again. He emphasized how important they were. Third, although he admitted that prisoners beyond the 14 who were transferred to Guantanamo had been held in the CIA's program, he failed to name those additional prisoners and gave no information about their fate or whereabouts, what had happened to them. Fourth, he used the occasion of the transfer of these prisoners to unveil the Military Commissions Act, which is a piece of legislation which has many, many flaws, and we won't have time today to go through them, but one of its serious and most appalling aspects is that it's really designed with the CIA program in mind, and it's designed to facilitate the prosecution of people using evidence obtained abusively via this program. So before I go into just a short description of a couple of the problems of the Military Commissions Act, I just want to mention Congress and the courts. After hearing, what went on, or this, very summary picture of what went on over 5 years, you have to ask yourself, where was Congress? Where was the courts? Where are these mechanisms that are supposed to provide some kind of oversight and accountability? Well, simply put, Congress exercised no oversight over the CIA's activities during this period. The administration withheld nearly all information about the program to Congress, and yet Congress did not complain about this failure. Only the heads of The congressional intelligence committees were even briefed about the program, and even they got only the barest outlines of the program. They probably received much more information from reading Dana Priest's articles than they ever received from the administration itself.